everyone. Welcome to the Keeping Score podcast, a podcast just about women's sports in North America. I'm Emma Askren, along with my co-host Dylan Heinrich, and this is the first ever episode, so we're just going to be running through that format and giving you guys basically a PWHL, which is the Professional Women's Hockey League here in North America, a guide for dummies on that new league. A little bit about ourselves. I am originally from Lexington, Kentucky, hence the Racing Louisville merch. You got to rep, which is the professional women's team in Louisville for soccer. There we go. I now go to school out in Colorado. And yeah, I'm majoring in journalism. I'm super passionate about women's sports and just wanted to start a podcast to be able to talk to me, myself, and Dylan, of course, about the women's sports that I'm so passionate about. And I'm super excited to see where this thing goes.
My name is Dylan Heinrich. I'm originally from Colorado, beautiful city of Fort Collins. I got my Broncos sweater on right now. So we met over at Colorado State. We both wrote for the school paper there, the Rocky Mountain Collegian, which Emma is graciously still an editor for. And so I have since moved on and I've now gone to college for myself. I am now at the University of Missouri. So I'm here in Columbia, here studying journalism. I'm also very passionate about sports, especially women's sports. I've been writing soccer, women's basketball, and I will be starting on the softball beat for the school paper out here, the Man-Eater. And so I wanted to get involved with, so we're going to be starting this podcast to talk about the PWHL, the NWSL, and the WNBA. And if you don't know those acronyms, you will know them soon enough.
Get ready for a lot of acronyms, especially in this episode, because we're going to be covering the entire history of the league. So starting from the 1990s when the original NWHL was founded, going to the CWHL and all these other things that we will dive in shortly. But of course, you guys are here to hear about our opinion on professional women's sports and what this podcast is all about. So let's dive right in and talking about our podcast format. First off, most of our podcasts are going to range anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. That's going to start off with a quick little introduction, game recaps across all women's sports leagues. So again, like Dylan mentioned, the WNBA, PWHL, and the NWSL. Just some game recaps covering basic scores, any key moments within those games, anything newsworthy or a big deal, especially with this new league, PWHL, being started up. There are so many firsts going on. That's going to be a lot of the key moments. Then we're going to be talking about player and management features, player of the weeks, for example. Those will be deep dives into those players and talking about their history, why they got started into the sport, and maybe pulling some clips from press conferences and things like that to make it extra interesting for you guys. And then, of course, you got to talk about some stuff that you might have missed out on or something that went viral. We want to highlight women's collegiate sports in this section. We'll be keeping it nice and light. Going back to that light and fun, we're going to have a little fun segment. Don't get your hopes up. It'll be new every week. We are still figuring this out, of course. This week's fun segment is going to be creating names for all of the current PWHL teams. So stay tuned for that. Following the completion of our little fun segment, we're going to have a coming up next. The next games across all the leagues and highlighting our social medias, of course. This podcast, however, is going to be a different format than what we just mentioned. It's going to be a guide for anybody getting interested in women's hockey, especially that PWHL we're talking about. And we're going to be covering anything from the league history to star players and the draft, and of course, team rivalries.
I would just say, strap in. This is going to be a fun first podcast. This is going to be one where you're going to know everything you want to know about the history of professional women's hockey in North America. And don't be scared if you don't know a lot about the sport, because that's what this is meant to be. That's what we're here for. We're trying to get more people into it. And so by the end of this episode, you should be caught up on everything. You don't have to go and research everything else. Emma and I are going to walk you through it. Feel free to turn into their YouTube channel like we do to watch the games every week. So it'll be a fun road.
Without further ado, let's dive right into that history of the PWHL. Women's hockey in North America began with the National Women's Hockey League. From now on, we're going to be referring to that as the NWHL. This was the first iteration of a women's professional league, and it ran from 1999 to 2007, mainly in Canada, surprisingly. It was in Ontario and Quebec, with some Western Canadian teams competing, but the Western Women's Hockey League, which was formed in 2004, took many of those Western teams in Canada and put them into their own league. So from 2004 to 2007, the NWHL was mainly Ontario and Quebec. This limited the Western teams' access from competing in that main league. Any professional women's sports league or any sports league in general, if you go back to the early 1900s, looking at the founding of the NBA, the NFL, all of our beloved men's sports leagues here, they all had rocky starts as well. There were many iterations. And so these are just some growing pains that women's professional leagues experienced. And in 2007, the NWHL eventually folded and was replaced by the Canadian Women's Hockey League, referring to the CWHL, which ran from 2007 all the way to only 5 years ago, 2019. The CWHL, however, did not pay players. It was a not for profit organization, and it would occasionally offer stipends and bonuses for playing well in games or championship tournaments, but nothing that was sustainable for the players. This caused a lot of backlash from those unpaid players, and eventually they refounded an NWHL in 2015, which did pay players, albeit not a lot for anything sustainable, but still compensation for their play. Now, going back to those timelines, you can see that the NWHL and the CWHL were running simultaneously from 2015 to 2019. This created a lot of tensions and a lot of financial instability between the leagues because there was no solid, cohesive unit for both of these teams to be competing. So in 2019, the CWHL abruptly folded due to lack of financial stability, which then allowed the NWHL, which was previously only in America, to expand into Canadian territories in 2020. Our beloved year of 2020 was the COVID-19 pandemic. This caused a lot of tension. It also prevented players from obviously playing in these leagues and a lot of turmoil in their lives. Hundreds of national team players came together because of this to form the Professional Women's Hockey Players Association. Now you can see that it doesn't follow the classic acronyms of the NWHL or the CWHL. This is because it was a players association, professional women's hockey players in general. They wanted a league, or they wanted a players association where no matter if the league had folded or if there was no league at the time, they would have a place where they could come together. They would still be able to get compensation, albeit not a lot, and they could become a cohesive unit, be able to bond, and eventually create our beloved PWHL that we know today. The PWHPA is an extremely important organization, and it also attracted partnerships with corporate sponsors and NHL teams and organized exhibition tournaments between just classic, some basic teams to generate support for their goal, which was to create a new league. Eventually, the NWHL, which was still running throughout this time, was rebranded as the Premier Hockey Federation in 2021. This rebranding got a lot of support from the NHL, and again, going back to those corporate sponsors, and the PHF had several notable advances from the previous NWHL, but we'll go into that a little bit later into this episode. Eventually, the Premier Hockey Federation was purchased by the Mark Walter Group, which is headed by Mark Walter, who's the current owner of the Los Angeles Dodgers. The Mark Walter Group entered a partnership with the PWHPA alongside Billie Jean King Enterprises, or BJK, where they terminated the existence of the PHF. So they literally said, we're going to buy this league and we're going to cut it. We're going to stop playing games. However, they immediately followed it up with support and the intention of starting a new league from the ground up, which is what the PWHL is now. So they had huge support from Mark Walter and Billie Jean King, who are both pretty wealthy at this point and would be able to provide that lacking financial stability in previous leagues to this new PWHL.
Yeah, I mean, when you're Mark Walter and you can own the LA Dodgers and you can pay Shohei Ohtani as much as you're paying him, you can do pretty much whatever you want. And I mean, Billie Jean King, like you said, is someone who's really supporting the women's game, someone who's really putting his money where his mouth is. And so this is something that is not even so recent. This had started as soon as 6 months ago, where this league has really kind of built itself from the found up. So now that we've kind of talked about what happened first, here's what's going to happen in the PWHL initial season. Because, I mean, it's all fun to talk about the past, but I mean, now we're at the current league. We are in the first year of the Professional Women's Hockey League, also known as the PWHL. As we mentioned, it previously was known as the PWHL, which was previously the NWHL, had some rocky history back then. It just wasn't fully connecting everything. There wasn't the financial backing. There wasn't quite the travel that everyone's looking for. And like you mentioned, the Players Association, they were not fully on board with the NWHL and the PHF, as the compensation was a big outlier, which was a problem. So
also the PWHPA wasn't willing to give up any of these necessary things that they required that the NWHL and the PHF both didn't provide, like paid maternity leave and a set bonus or a set cap for the lowest paid players. That is something that the PWHL does provide with the help of that players association.
It's just the PWHPA, the Players Association, just keep it simple. That's really one of their main things that they were able to stick with. And so while it may look a little bit foolish, like, oh, why aren't you playing in the league? There's a league for professional hockey. It's like, no, we're going to stick behind our values and we're going to stick with our head in the stone and we're going to just stick here like a brick wall and do what we need to do. When we talk about this, there was something that was going wrong. We talk a lot. It all comes down to finances. Everyone just wants to make money. And so we're still looking to be able to pay players to get that notoriety. And that was finally something that the PWHL, with a fundraising campaign, the advertising campaigns with Billie Jean King and Mark Walter, and they were finally able to put that together. And the PWHL was officially founded. It's all really crazy. We've all gone over, 30 years of history in like 5-10 minutes. And so it was announced by Mark Walter and Billie Jean King that they started the PHF and that they would halt the operations at the completion of the season. There were no details really until August of 2023. So like I said, not only was this last year, this was the back half of last year. So that would be what? The 8th month of the year, which is pretty crazy to think about because that's not just over 4 months ago. And this league has already been playing games.
And think about it, right? Like, first of all, there had to have been discussions going on and behind the scenes before this league was announced. So, granted, the league probably wasn't founded in August, but it was announced to the public in August. The turnaround time of 4 months to the first game being played on New Year's Day of 2024 from starting in August 29th of 2023 is an absolutely wild turnaround time for any league, let alone a major professional women's hockey league.
But I mean, you think about it, that's really smart because now it's fresh in everybody's mind. It's not like you announce it in February, but then you have 11 months for teams to kind of go ahead and let things die off. No, they started the league, there's the free agency, there's the draft, which we'll get into, and that all eventually leads up to opening day, which you mark it on a major holiday is something that people are going to be celebrating. And so when we look at these teams, there are 6 founding teams, very similar to the NHL, which had their 6 founding. So there are 3 Canadian teams and there are 3 American teams. The 3 Canadian teams are Ottawa, Toronto, and Montreal, 3 of the biggest eastern cities. Ontario is a huge contributor for women's hockey, which we're going to talk about a little bit more, which is why they have Ottawa and Toronto. Montreal is just a massive, massive hub for both hockey and women's hockey in general. And then when we look at our 3 American teams, we've got New York, the biggest market in the entire US, Boston, another very northeastern city, someone that's got a lot of hockey roots, and then the hockey state, Minnesota, has to have a team, and which we'll talk a lot more about the PWHL Minnesota and just the success that they've been under. But that's somewhat consider it the outlier because it's kind of geographically displaced from the other 5 teams. It's really the furthest away, but I think that has been one of the key decisions is putting that team in Minnesota and really helped explode the PWHL is especially a lot of that talent coming from Minnesota.
That Minnesota team is stacked with not only Minnesota natives, but University of Minnesota hockey players as well. It is a wild team. I guess is around 2/3 to 3/4 of that team is Minnesotan born, which is crazy. Talk about the state of hockey. And then, of course, they're beating records left and right. They're playing in the Minnesota Wild Stadium, and the sections that they had available for fans to buy sold out. They beat the record of 10,000 fans. Absolutely wild. Minnesota is going to be the head of this league. I can already tell you right now, they're having incredible success in the league, and there's big things coming for this Minnesota team.
And so, as we mentioned, before they had the draft, they had a free agency period where there were 3 players that were allowed to sign with each team because, everything's better in thirds. So the first 3 players were signed to Ottawa. And so they were Emerence Mashmeyer, Emily Clark, and then current captain Brianne Jenner. So those are the 3 first players to sign with Ottawa on September 5th. And now we're going to go over the rest of the players from every other team. When we go to Montreal, Marie-Philippe Poulin to a 3-year deal. She is the only player, male or female, to score in 4 Olympic gold medal games. Excuse me. I mean, she's undisputably one of the best women's hockey league players in North America. It's hard to pick someone else.
Yeah, I mean, she's the captain of Montreal right now, I believe, and she is absolutely slaying it up right now in the league. I mean, Poulin is an amazing player, first of all. I mean, look at that stat. In an anonymous poll from The Athletic, 68% of both Canadian and American players picked her for the first overall pick in the draft. And she wasn't even drafted. She was signed in free agency, which is wild.
We look at Montreal's 2 other picks. Laura Stacey, another forward, 3 years, 9 goals and 22 points in 20 games last year. Then Anne Renee Debian. It's
Yeah,
those French names. We're gonna
those
get used to it.
French.
You're gonna get used to it, folks. To another 3-year deal. That's the first goaltender and the only one signed for Montreal in free agency. And so they currently hold the record in the NCAA with 21 shutouts in a single season at Wisconsin, which, assuming you know anything about hockey, a shutout is not easy. 21 in an NCAA regulation season is absurd.
Absolutely wild for Debian. She's been slaying it up in the league currently. She is doing an amazing things at Montreal. They haven't had exactly the best record right now, but she's been able to play this team so well. She has been carrying the back of this Montreal team, and honestly, I'd say she's the reason she deserves to be player of the match for a couple of these games that we've seen.
But let's take a look at some of these other teams. Now we're going to move on to Boston. The first pick, current captain, Hillary Knight, a forward. While many people, it's kind of hard to get in and know a lot of the players in women's hockey. If you've heard of anyone, it's Hillary Knight. She is the face of the U.S. women's hockey. I could say that pretty comfortably, holding the record for most points scored in the IIHF top tournaments at 101, which is just absurd. Most titles and medals at 9 world titles, 13 overall medals. Just a special player and someone who deserves the recognition that she's been getting.
I mean, she's been playing in college. I believe her starting freshman season was 2007. So she's been in the hockey environment for such a long time. Hillary Knight is a face of U.S. hockey. Everyone knows her. Everyone either hates her or loves her, depending on who you cheer for in the PWHL. But she is definitely a player to be watching out for in these upcoming games.
Definitely a well-deserved captain spot given tonight. As we look at the other players, we got Aaron Frankel, a 3-year deal, who beat out Debian for the single season save percentage of .965 compared to Debian's .963, which .965 is outrageously good. I mean, you look at the average, it's somewhere around a .92, .91. Elite goaltenders hover around the .94. Leagues and miles above that. So that is just truly competing at not only an elite level, but a special level, like one of one type level. Third player on Boston, the first defender we've gone over, Megan Keller, 3-year deal again. She was a point per game player as a defenseman at Boston College, 158 points in 151 games. Set the program record for points, goals, and assists by a defenseman. Coming from Boston College, you're going to go to the PWHL Boston. Like we mentioned, the Minnesota teams, a lot of the Canadian teams picked Canadian players. Boston College for Keller, PWHL Boston. Just makes sense.
If you look at all of these free agency signings, I'm sorry, this was the opportunity for all of these PWHL teams to come in and sign exactly who they wanted and then to build their rosters around these players because the draft didn't start until a couple days after this free agency period ended. So this was when all of the players who were not currently playing in college or not currently playing were able to sign up for that free agency period and teams were able to sign them. And that's why you see star players like Hillary Knight, Sarah Nurse, Kendall Coyne Schofield, who haven't played in a professional league for a while, have been able to come and get signed first off the bat in this free agency period.
I definitely say for these players especially, it's a bigger honor to be signed than to be drafted first overall because it means we can't even wait for the draft to take you guys. We got to make sure that you are on our team as of right now. And many of these players are all respective captains for their team. So not only are they viewed as great players, but they're viewed as great leaders. Now, time to go over PWHL Minnesota. One player who we haven't talked about is Kendall Coyne Schofield, a forward and the captain for Minnesota. Another face and one of the fastest, if not the fastest, female skater in the world. She participated in the 2019 NHL skills competition, which featured several female athletes competing alongside the NHL counterparts. in the skills competition and placed 7th out of 8th with a time of 14.346, which I don't even know if I could get onto the rink in 14.43 seconds. Like, that is not something that is easy to come by whatsoever.
Kendall Coyne Schofield is an absolute beast, icon, and legend. I said what I said. She is good at her job. She was a former captain of the U.S. women's national team, and that skills competition for fastest skater. Like Dylan said, there were a bunch of other women competing in the skills competition. She was the only woman competing in the fastest skater section of this competition. Going around the rink in 14 seconds is wild.
We mentioned Minnesota a lot, and her name will definitely be coming up when we dissect more of the individual games. We're going to move on to the other two Minnesota players. First of all, we've got Lee Steckline, who was a former captain of the Minnesota Golden Gophers, like we mentioned, that regional pride. For 2 years, was a 3-time NCAA champion, Minnesota native. Like we mentioned, we got that regional pride. Next up, we got Kelly Panek, another forward. Once again, another member of a Minnesota Golden Gophers team. She was one of the centers for Team USA. And then she was, you guessed it, another Minnesota native. And so that's one place. I mean, state of hockey, it's no joke.
Talk about breeding grounds for these players. Two Minnesota natives out of a huge Minnesota team. This team is stacked, absolutely loaded, and they're doing well in the league right now. So these signings have come into huge plays for Minnesota. Let's move on to Toronto.
As we've got Sarah Nurse, first overall, like you mentioned, Nurse already. She was another 3-year deal, holds the record for points at a single Olympic tournament with 18 in the 2022 Olympics, which helped earn her the cover of NHL 23 alongside Trevor Zegras, one of the great up-and-comers in the NHL who plays for the Anaheim Ducks. And so Nurse is absolutely someone who's making a huge impact and someone who is very notable in the hockey landscape. You could agree.
Oh, I 100% agree. Come on. It's Sarah Nurse.
And so we've got Renata Fast, who is a defender, who is fairly fast. Fun little tidbit, easy last name to remember. You've got another 3-year deal there. One of the hardest defensemen to play against, won an NCAA during her time at Clarkson University, a smaller school that's more so known for their hockey, especially on the women's end. And then you've got Blair Turnbull, a forward, another 3-year deal. She is a forechecker. She is always going to be mixing it up, making life hard on defensemen. She's going to play rough, but she's also going to be versatile. She is the key piece of the puzzle, according to Toronto GM Gina Kingsbury in a piece from The Athletic. So while she doesn't have like the stupid, crazy goal scoring ability or like the craziest passes, she's going to play rough. She's going to do all the little things, and she's just going to do whatever it takes to help her team win.
And I mean, talk about rough. One thing the players asked for in this league is to be able to play more physically. We saw that right off the bat in the first game. And honestly, Blair Turnbull is going to be a huge key piece to that roughness and physical aspect of the game that these women are looking for.
If you turn on a PWHL Toronto game at some point this year, you will see Turnbull lighting somebody up, a little bit of a face wash here and there, just playing some nice physical hockey that makes this sport so special.
Ottawa did some great things with their roster here, signing 2 forwards and a goalie. They knew they were going to get some defenders in the draft, which we'll talk about. Great things from Ottawa. Can't ask for any more.
We'll run through this last team real quick. So we've got PWHL New York. We're going to start off with Abby Roque, a forward. And I believe all of these are 3-year deals. Is that correct, Emma?
Yes, yep. All of them are 3-year deals, pretty standard. Again, going back to what I mentioned before, the PWHL, these teams during this free agency period, these were players that the teams really wanted. And so obviously they're going to want to keep them here for a pretty long time. Hence all of them being signed to 3-year deals.
But back to Roque. 3-year deal. She played on Team USA, won 3 championships and 2 under-18 medals. She played college hockey at Wisconsin and is known for her physicality and ability to win the puck, especially in those corners. Very similar to a role that Turnbull plays. Not exactly going to score a whole bunch of points, but again, she's really leaning into that physical, hard-nosed hockey. Next up, we've got another forward, Alex Carpenter. Hasn't played pro hockey outside of Russia in a while. And so she played in pro hockey in Russia, scored 55 goals in 50 games, which we talk about point per game basis. A goal per game is something that is very hard to do. And then she won the Patty Kazmaier Award as a junior. not as a senior, as a junior at Boston College back in 2015. So we see New York leaning more into these collegiate dynasties in the Wisconsins and the Boston colleges. We'll go over their final player and their only defenseman picked, which was Micah Zandy Hart, to a 3-year deal. She is currently a member of the Canadian team, so kind of double dipping. She was a co-captain at Cornell and was 4th in the country during her senior year as points per game for a defender. So another defender who is not only doing their job on the defensive end, but is also highly contributing, especially on the passing game, to the offense.
You were mentioning that physical aspect with Alex Carpenter. Talk about first game of the season, New York versus Toronto. You've got two physical players in Turnbull and Carpenter. They went at it. This game, I was watching it live and I was like, no way the refs didn't call that, right? They didn't call it. They played hard. They played so well. It was so awesome to see that physicality aspect. We're going to take a quick break, but after the break, we're going to talk about our beloved PWHL draft, where we'll get into more of those key players. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for taking that quick break with us. We'll go ahead and start it right off. We talked about that free agency period. Now let's move on to the draft. So the free agency period was 10 days starting at the beginning of September. And of course, the PWHL draft was held in Toronto on September 18th. The draft consisted of 15 rounds with 90 players being selected from a pool of 286 players. So it was really awesome to see the amount of people that showed up and showed out for this draft. Let's talk about that first pick, forward Taylor Heise. Heise was the first overall draft pick being selected by PWHL. Guess what? Minnesota. Heise played for the Minnesota Golden Gophers from 2018 to 2023, and is actually one of few players who's able to go fresh out of college straight into this new league. So really awesome for her. She did great things at Minnesota, where she only in her freshman year led the team with 147 shots on goal, which is absolutely crazy. Heise only became more of a hockey star from there, and she was the player and forward of the year in 2022. Heise was a no-brainer pick for that first round from PWHL Minnesota. Moving right on to that second round draft pick was defenseman Jacqueline Larocque. She was drafted to PWHL Toronto. She is a Canadian native, which, of course, going to a Toronto team, that's pretty awesome for her. And she was a first-team All-American during her time at University of Minnesota Duluth. That third pick was the center, Alina Mueller. She was drafted to PWHL Boston. She is from Legnau, Switzerland, and is one of the few internationals outside of America and Canada here. And she's been playing on the Swiss national team since she was 15 years old, where she was the youngest player to win an Olympic medal after scoring the game-winning goal in the bronze medal match in the 2014 Olympics. So Mueller's been around. She's still really young, and she started playing at an international level. So again, that hockey IQ was way up there. She is going to be a stellar option for Boston.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about these American and Canadian born players, but as it's shown in the NHL and the PWHL, there's a lot of great international talent, especially in Northern Europe, Scandinavia, and Switzerland, no exception. I mean, if you can play in the Olympics and score a game-winning goal in a medal match, like there's nowhere to go from there but up.
Talk about spreading that audience, right? Moving right along to pick number 4 in the draft was defenseman Ella Shelton, drafted to PWHL New York, and she's the alternate captain for the team. So she has that solid leadership skill that New York is looking for. And during her junior year, she played at Clarkson University. Again, looking at that smaller schools, she led the Golden Knights in shots blocked at 81. 81 shots. Great pick from New York. I got no thoughts. She's doing so many good things for New York, especially that 4-0 dub over Toronto.
I know we talked about physicality, especially New York, Toronto. Something that's really is not only how hard can you hit, but how hard can you get hit and get back up. And there's no better judge of a player's like character and their ability to play for the team than shots blocked. And leading during a collegiate season with 81 shots blocked, that is not easy. Could have prevented upwards of 81 goals. You never know. So she is absolutely a huge defensive pickup.
Moving right along to the 5th round pick in the PWHL draft from Ottawa was defenseman Savannah Harmon. She, again, guess what? Played at Clarkson. what are all these Clarkson players doing? It's absolutely awesome to see from a smaller school. And she captained them to consecutive NCAA tournaments in 2017 and 2018 during her time there.
When we talk about Clarkson, most people have not even heard of Clarkson, and the only time most people, if they have heard it, is in hockey. It also is really good to see their standouts in the women's hockey game as well, where they are providing a lot of these players. It helps build the PWHL brand to that market, and it also helps build the Clarkson market to see, hey, here are some players who are coming out of this area, and here is a place that you could absolutely go for college. I mean, might as well make this a Clarkson advertisement, apparently.
Going back to defensemen, almost every single pick in this first round has been a defender. You've got pick 2, 4, 5, and 6 in the first round are all defensemen. And moving on, that last and final pick of the first round, it was defenseman Erin Ambrose. She was the final pick of the first round, being drafted to PWHL Montreal, and she played for Clarkson during her rookie year. She was the leading point scorer amongst all rookies in the NCAA, and she averaged 1.06 points per game. So there is a plus points per game average there. And again, as a defenseman, that's pretty awesome to see. There's nothing better to say than this is a solid PWHL draft. Defensemen were key, especially looking at those free agencies with most teams signing those forwards or those goaltenders. It's really awesome to see a lot of defenders making their stakes in this first round.
Yeah, when you look at this, I think it's also because like every team hit a home run. There's been no one who is just like flamed out of the league or anyone who's had discipline troubles. It's just a bunch of really, really good hockey players. There are certainly teams that have good nights and bad nights, but it doesn't feel like there is any particular team that is going to run away with the league. We talk about a lot about Minnesota, but hey, there are absolutely no guarantees that this is their league to lose.
Look at the games, look at the teams. There's only 6 teams in this league, which means they're playing each other a lot. They're able to learn each team's playing styles. Look at how they're being coached. Look at the players. If there are any injuries, seeing how that's going to impact the team. And they're playing each other so much that there's no reason this league shouldn't be super tight. I mean, there's a lot of games going forwards. We have a lot of stuff to look forward to. It's only the first 2 weeks of the season, so we have so many more games to look forwards to. And of course, so many players to see playing. So let's move on to the rest of the draft with some notable draft picks. We have Emma Maltese of PWHL Toronto. She studied at the Ohio State University and was and still is a forward. During her rookie year, she scored more points than games, like a lot of these players, to be honest. And she's continued this record, which is not like a lot of players in this draft, for all 4 years of her collegiate career from 2017 to 2023. Again, she's one of those players who's been able to come fresh out of college into the league and make a huge impact. Emma Maltese is somebody whose name you're going to hear a lot going forward. You know whose name you're also going to hear a lot going forward is Grace Zumwinkle. She scored the first hat trick in PWHL history and got drafted by PWHL Minnesota, and of course, studied at the University of Minnesota and plays as a forward. She's made huge strides in that PWHL again, scoring the first hat trick. You got to go look at the highlights on their YouTube channel because this was crazy to see. She's been doing amazing things in the PWHL, not even making it as a first round draft pick, but certainly acting like one.
This is just someone who is very talented as a shooter and a scorer, and hat tricks are not easy to come by. And the fact that there's been one in the first couple weeks, I believe it even happened in the first week. And so Zumwinkle just showing her goal scoring prowess, just coming straight out. We talked about how good and well-rounded this Minnesota roster is, but she is absolutely someone who is not to be slept on and someone who can just absolutely torch a defense any night.
Moving on to Jessie Eldridge of the PWHL New York. She studied at Colgate University, where she led them to their first ever NCAA championship in program history when she was playing in 2018. And she signed to a 2-year contract, making huge strides in that PWHL, leaning into that more physical side that you're going to see from New York.
She helped lead them to their first championship game in program history. When you talk about leading and making something new and just wanting to be a trailblazer, that's something that Eldridge has absolutely been experienced before. That's something she's already had to deal with. And so having that experience of knowing, okay, maybe this hasn't been done before, this is something that we have to navigate a little bit. And that's just something that Eldridge has that not a lot of other players can truly say, outside of especially the ones in the Players Association. So definitely a great later pickup for PWHL New York.
Now that we've gone over that draft, now that we've gone over the free agents, But let's talk about who's funding this thing. I mean, a professional women's hockey league is not something to be frowned upon. And also, with the previous history we've talked about, professional women's hockey leagues have been incredibly financially unstable. So it's really important that these investors know what they're doing and have the money to provide this league for a sustainable period of time. Nearly every single one of these signings we've talked about has been a multi-year contract, which is super awesome to see and puts the expectation that this league will be here for years to come. Mark Walter of the Mark Walter Group and Billie Jean King of BJK Enterprises both support the PWH Players Association, which again has now become the PWHL Players Association with the creation of this new league. They're both supporters of it. And then Mark Walter, he owns all 6 teams in the league, which each of them having their own general managers that we'll talk about shortly. So Mark Walter is the key investor in this league. He has a lot of money to be spending. I mean, he's obviously the owner of the LA Dodgers, like you mentioned, and Shohei Ohtani. Man's got money. Why not spend it on a professional women's hockey league? Come on now. He's doing the right things at the right times, making big splashes on the ice. And honestly, he's doing the right thing right now. Like I mentioned before, is Billie Jean King. She's known for her Battle of the Sexes tennis tournament, but also on the professional women's sports side, she fought for the first ever professional women's contract in tennis. And it was the first ever in any sport. It's only at $1 a day, which for the time was a huge stride. Obviously, they'd never been paid before. So this was a huge deal. And Billie Jean King has been a huge, huge aid in not only the U.S. women's soccer national team lawsuit for equal pay, but also the creation of the collective bargaining agreement in both of these leagues, which is a huge deal. Billie Jean King is the person to be talking about a professional women's hockey league. Going back to that collective bargaining agreement, that's one thing that is different in this new PWHL format. And that's something that differentiates itself from not only previous professional women's hockey leagues, but any professional sports league ever. They have never had a CBA prior to the inaugural match. This is the only women's league that has not only had a players association as well founded prior, again, but that's CBA. The CBA bargains for things like paid maternity leave, which is a huge deal because it supports women not only being mothers, but also being the incredible professional athletes they are.
It's great to see them looking out for the players more than anything else, because that's even a huge problem in men's sports, where it seems that the corporation comes before all and that there's not a huge amount of trust and that the players are easily replaceable. But that's not the case in the PWHL at all. It's the players that make the league, not the league that makes the players. So you take these huge personalities like Hillary Knights, and then you are able to help fund this league around these amazing, talented, huge name superstars. And then now the league and the players both benefit instead of just the league trying to control the players. Now it's more of a cohesive collective unit.
It's a money making opportunity. That's why women's sports leagues have been so difficult to start because investors don't see that money making opportunity. And now we're getting that with the CBA, with the support from the players. It's really awesome to see. Now, talking about support, another thing that's different with this PWHL is the initiation of strong, cohesive support from the NHL. As mentioned previously, the NHL had strong support in the PHF, which was formerly the NWHL, as well as the Players Association in creating advertising and sponsorships. Minnesota actually plays in the Wild Stadium, which is awesome. And at the puck drop of every inaugural match, there has been, I believe, at least one NHL player in attendance. And it's just super awesome to see men supporting women like they deserve. So all of this new advertising, all of this support, all of these sponsorships have created a huge deal for this league and have been able to create those sellout opportunities in Toronto, sellout opportunities in Montreal and Ottawa too at certain games. It's honestly incredible to see and well deserved for these women who have been waiting for this for a long time.
Yeah, something we didn't even touch on that just recently came out was the PWHL 3-on-3 showcase taking place at the NHL All-Star Challenge. So they're taking a bunch of the best PWHL players and they're going to have them play 3-on-3 during the middle of the NHL 3-on-3 games, which honestly are probably going to be better because most of what the NHL is doing nowadays, they're just having the players skate around and go through the motion. I think the PWHL, they're in season, they're ready for the massive stage that comes with. Minnesota is well aware of what it's like to play on this massive stage, but getting to see the whole nationwide eyes, I know all the ones are free on YouTube, but a lot of these are going to be on national TV. It's going to be massive opportunities for a lot of these ladies. And really, not only is it going to be about the individual teams, but it's more so just about the league and about the players themselves and just showing what women's hockey is all about. And like you talk about the NHL supporting the PWHL. At the end of the day, it's not men's hockey, it's not women's hockey, it's just hockey.
But hockey's fun. Doesn't matter who's on the ice. It's fun to watch.
Hmm.
Let's talk about those rule changes, right? This isn't all about the NHL supporting us. The PWHL is different, right? They have three main rule changes that have happened. First of all, the shorthanded goal. This has received a lot of hate from people because it's a huge change in the way that games are played now. This new rule states that if a team scores a shorthanded goal, the penalty with the least amount of time on it remaining will automatically end. So let's say Dylan's in the box. Man got hit for slashing. All right. He's in the box. He's got a minute and 30 seconds left. His opponent is also in the box. They've got a minute and 45 seconds left on the penalty. Now, Dylan's team scores a goal. Dylan's out of the box because he has a minute and 30 left compared to his opponent, which has a minute and 45. I did see it in action, didn't like it. It'll take some warming up for me, but it's so different. It's getting people talking about the PWHL. It separates itself from the NHL. It's awesome to see these rule changes.
I'm gonna go ahead and defend the shorthanded goal a little bit because what it means is that the team that is shorthanded, it actually encourages them to play offense instead of just like standing around the defensive end and just trying to stall, trying to clear pucks. This way, instead, they can actually start to push, start to get some more of those opportunities, and that encourages to play some of your best players on the penalty kill as well. And so those players are going to get more ice time. You're going to get to see some more of those stars like your Hillary Knights or your Taylor Heises, which usually don't play the penalty kill. Now will start to play more often because if you can kill off that penalty with a goal, then hey, that immediately helps your team and is a huge momentum swing because not only do you give up a shorthanded goal, but you would lose the power play. So it just adds insult to injury in this case.
That's one reason I don't like it, but I can totally see where Dylan is coming from. And like, it's so awesome to see the teams going harder during these power plays, being able to initiate this rule and kind of work harder for that end goal. Talk about working harder. Let's talk about harder hitting. This was one thing that the players specifically asked for during their negotiations with the creation of this new league. I remember seeing an interview with Hillary Knight where she was like, yeah, this is something we asked for. A lot of the main hate that prior leagues had been getting was that, oh, women don't hit hard, women don't play hard. Not anymore. Check out the highlights on TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube. It is crazy to see. I mean, I saw one player's face get mashed into the boards. It's hockey. Harder hitting is awesome. The new rules have been modified or have been modeled, excuse me, after the NHL rules, and it specifically includes IIHF rules on body checking, face protection, and fighting. Again, the players specifically asked for this game, for this league to be more physical, and boy, did we see it in that New York Toronto game of the season.
I know as well that a lot of people's frustration with the NHL is that they are kind of phasing out that physical game. You're getting more and more what are called softer penalties where they're just losing more and more of their audience. And people are like, oh, what happened to the sport that I loved? Hey, go check out the PWHL where they are encouraging hits. They're just trying to make it more physical. That it's going to be a huge part of the game. Like you mentioned, watch Toronto, watch New York. These are two teams that are very physical and are going to put out their best every single night. And so this physical nature is something that is crucial to hockey and it's a tone setter at the end of the day. If you can go ahead and body check your opponent straight into the wall, not only is that going to hurt, that sends a message that I'm not here to play around. I'm here to win and I don't care if you get in my way, which is just so great to see from this new league.
Granted, there are plenty of rules in place for safety, and we've seen a lot of availability and power plays from players being in the box for things like harder hitting, right? There have been a couple pretty solid fights. Saw one of, I can't remember the game, but it was so funny. I mean, one player straight up came up behind her, yanked her jersey onto the ground because she ran into the goaltender, man. What else are you going to do? Let's move on to the next and final main rule change of the PWHL, the 3-2-1 rule. This is the point scoring system in the PWHL that has changed a little bit from the NHL. It's 3 points for a regulation win, 2 points for an overtime or shootout win, and 1 point for an overtime or shootout loss. And of course, 0 points for a regulation loss. So this is really cool to see that they're offering points for an OT shootout loss. That's not something that they do in the NHL, and it's really cool to see that being implemented because it reduces ties, reduces draws from happening, and it'll create those bigger scores or closer scores depending on how you look at it.
A problem that has been plaguing the NHL for a while is the fact that they have the 3-1-0 system. So it's 3 points for regulation or overtime or shootout win, 1 point for a or for an overtime loss, and 0 points for a regulation loss. So that means you don't get penalized for going to overtime and still winning. So what a lot of teams will do when you get the final 2 or 3 minutes is they'll just like give up in a better sense. They'll just say, okay, we're tied. We're both just gonna go ahead and take this to overtime. Guarantee we both get a point. But in the PWHL, that's not as much the case because you get penalized for going to overtime. If you want that extra point, you better beat that team in regulation. You're going to have to fight for that final buzzer to earn those 3 points. If not, guess what? You're going to be docked a point.
It's really awesome to see these rule changes separating themselves. And of course, it's getting people talking about the PWHL. Let's talk about the management and arenas. So we spoke a little bit about the PWHL Minnesota playing in the Wild Stadium. Let's talk about it. The general manager is Natalie Darwitz from Minnesota. She's the former captain of Team USA, and she's a three-time Olympic medalist. The head coach, it was supposed to be Charlie Burgraff. He was the former head coach of both the men's and women's teams of Bethel University. However, he stepped down and was replaced by Ken Klee, who was the former head coach of the U.S. national team. Of course, Minnesota plays in the XL Energy Center, which is the home of Minnesota Wild.
Yeah, you look at the Team USA caliber on this roster, or on the both the roster and on the staff for all of these teams, especially Minnesota. And I mean, it comes to no surprise that this team is as good as it is when you have that sort of national presence and that sort of cohesivity that comes with the national stage. And then, like we mentioned, it's the state of hockey. You're playing in the XL Energy Center, the home of the Minnesota Wild, an absolutely massive arena, just a wonderful arena for hockey. It sells out just about every time that you put a hockey game in there. And so that is just a truly special place for a truly special team that we've been talking about.
Let's move on to PWHL Toronto.
So when we look at the PWHL Toronto, we're going to take a look at our first management on the Canadian side. You've got Gina Kingsbury, she's the GM, the former VP of hockey operations for Hockey Canada. Like you mentioned, it's a little bit more of that like national pride aspect, and was the former GM for the Canadian women's national team. Head coach is Troy Ryan, the former head coach of the Canadians women's national team. Worked very similarly with Gina Kingsbury. They play at Mattamy Athletic Center in the Maple Leaf Gardens, which was the first unofficial NHL game was held in the Mattamy Athletic Center. And so what do you think is so cool about, like, especially the history and just the sort of environment that Toronto's been able to build?
Look at it, man. This is a Canadian team through and through. A lot of those free agencies were from Canada, and you've got a stacked management roster too. Gina Kingsbury, Canadian hockey operations, head coach Troy Ryan, also Canadian women's national team. This is a loaded Toronto roster. I mean, I can't wait to see the things that they keep doing. I hope that they're able to do maybe some sillier, goofier things with the Canadian aspect of it. But I am so here for PWHL Toronto. I'm about to start calling them PWHL Canada at this point. Yeah, let's move on to Boston over here. We've got the GM as Danielle Marmer. She was a former scout and player development assistant for the NHL's Boston Bruins. A notable trend that you're seeing in the PWHL is people from the area becoming those managers, becoming those coaches, and becoming those players too. It's really awesome to see that local support. Then we've got the head coach, Courtney Kessel, who is a former associate head coach for the Boston University women's team. So she's got connections. She knows who she wants to be signing for the upcoming drafts, the upcoming free agency periods. And again, she's brought in some people from BU to go play for PWHL Boston. They play in the Songus Center, which is the home of the D1 men's and women's hockey team for the University of Massachusetts Lowell. Going back to the women supporting women, we've got a female GM, we've got a female head coach for Boston, we've got a female GM for Toronto, we've got a female GM, and we've got a female GM for Minnesota. So look at those women supporting women. You're looking at the assistant coaches too. Check out the rosters; they're mostly women, and it is so awesome to see women supporting women in this league. Let's move right on to PWHL New York.
When we look at PWHL New York, we've got the GM Pascal Daoust, the former GM for the QMJHL, the Quebec Maritimes Junior Hockey League. We said it, these acronyms, they're going to get you. The Val d'Orfors. And then you've got our
Yes.
head coach, Howie Draper, the semi-former head coach at the University Alberta hockey team, who took a leave of absence there before coming in to New York. And they split the time between the Total Mortgage Arena, which is home to the Bridgeport Islanders, one of the AHL teams, I believe, associated with the Islanders. And then you have the UBS Arena, which is the awesome new home that they built for the New York Islanders. Another massive stadium, very similar to what Minnesota plays in.
Little concerned about that leave of absence, to be honest. Well, is he going to keep being the head coach? Is he going to go back to Alberta? There's a lot of questions up in the air there, but I do assume he's definitely committed for this season to PWHL New York. Excited to see the things he keeps doing. Obviously, he's doing some pretty good things. He's got a lot of good dubs against Toronto. Let's move on to PWHL Ottawa. We've got the general manager, Michael Hirschfield. He's the former executive director of the NHL's Coaches Association. So he has a lot of connections in the NHL, a lot of connections to good coaches. So I'm excited to see who we brought in with Carla McLeod, the former Canadian national teamer and head coach of the Czech women's national team, going back to that Czech Republic international aspect of the PWHL. Yeah, Carla McLeod is going to be a big deal. She has that national team experience. She's able to bring in that national team style of play, which is a lot faster paced, a lot quicker than club play. It's super exciting to see. And then Ottawa's playing in the TD Place Arena, which was home of the Senators in the late 90s.
Just something about it just feels so nostalgic. You just look at it and you feel it. We will look at our final team, both overall and on the Canadian side, where they're throwing a bunch of these Quebec names at me. So I will do my best. We've got our GM Danielle Sauvageau, former host of the Canadian national team. We see a lot of this where the coaches they'll start as players, coaches, GMs. They'll slowly work their way up that managerial chain. Now getting a major opportunity to work for the GM spot. Moving on to the new head coach, Corey Cheveret.
Anytime we butcher someone's name, we just need them to come on the
Tell
podcast.
us how to say your name and why everyone should cheer for PWHL Montreal. I'm sure you've got a great argument. She is the former assistant for the Canadian men's national team and was the first woman to coach a men's Canadian team, which is just something that's truly breaking down barriers. And now she gets to work as a head coach in her own role and really supporting her team. As like you mentioned, women supporting women. They split the arenas. The Verdun Auditorium, home to several Montreal hockey teams, just absolutely great audience in Montreal, and Place Bell, home of the Laval Rocket of the AHL. These teams have plenty of rivalries. While it is still women's hockey, it gets pretty heated. We'll go over some of those rivals and some more about the PWHL after this short break. Welcome back after our second short break. We are in for our third and final segment. We've been talking a lot of friendly stuff. We've been talking all cheers, all happy things. Now it's time to get to that fierce rivalry aspect. What do you think is so crucial about having these key rivalries, Emma?
Well, location, first of all. I mean, Ottawa versus Montreal. Let's get into it. Just down the road from each other in one of the most physical games of the season. These teams have had long traditions of rivalries, tensions, feuds, whatever you want to call them. Ottawa versus Montreal is always going to be a big debate. Anytime these two teams play each other, it's gonna get rowdy and it's gonna get physical. And then these teams are very close, again, geographically to each other, and they already have pre-existing rivalries in the NHL. So it's pretty cool to see everything going on within that, taking those NHL rivalries, bringing them into the PWHL, seeing that, and then of course you gotta have Toronto versus New York. This was a game. We've been talking about it the whole episode of the physicality of these two teams. They're two large cities, two classic landmarks. You've got the Toronto Tower and you've got the New York City Empire State Building. Again, this was the first game of the season for these two teams. I'm so stoked to see these two teams compete any single time they come up on my YouTube feed.
I really like the New York Toronto one because I mean it just makes sense. It's the biggest market in the United States versus the biggest market in Canada. It's the Empire State Building versus the CN Tower. It's just such a pure encapsulating thing that I don't think I think is really unique to the PWHL. I mean the NHL, the Maple Leafs don't really have a rivalry with the Rangers or the Islanders. It's not really something you get in baseball or in basketball or any other pro Toronto area except for the PWHL. This is a rivalry that will just continue to grow and expand, and I guarantee these two teams are going to go back and forth with one another for the next hopefully 20 plus years as they just continue to build and fight and just clash with one another.
Montreal had that first sold out game of the season, and you could tell they didn't want Ottawa or vice versa to be there. It was loud in the fans too. It wasn't just loud on the teams on the ice, it was loud in the audience. Super awesome. And honestly, these rivalries are going to be the big games that the audience shows up to that we need to keep this league around. Speaking of teams and rivalries, let's get into our deferring team names with our fun segment. For our fun segment, we decided to make up some PWHL team names. One of the main reasons you'll see that none of the teams have any branding besides colors is because the league was founded so quickly. In a quote from the general manager of the entire league, this isn't something we wanted to focus on. We wanted to prioritize the creation of the league, the creation of the fan base for the league first. That way it can stay around. If you have fans supporting the league rather than individual teams, those teams can stay around in new iterations of leagues. The league won't be able to stay around to support these players forever. So they wanted to prioritize the funding and the financials onto the creation of the league first. People were upset when they saw the jerseys, but I can't wait to see what comes out next season. Let's talk about it. First, we have PWHL Minnesota. Dylan, what was your name?
Yeah, so PWHL Minnesota, we talk about this team a lot. You got to make sure you get it right. They've got their main color is purple. I love me a purple jersey. Their jersey right now is absolutely sick. But when I think purple, when I think Minnesota, I think one thing. I think Purple Rain. I think of Prince. I think of the absolute legend who was from that area. And so that's why I think they should be called the Minnesota Rain. That is a name that has been stuck with, as we know, the Seattle Reign in the NWSL. There's also the Ontario Reign in Ontario, Canada for the AHL. This is a team that's maybe not the uniquest in the world, but I feel like the Reign, the royalty sense, fits Minnesota so well. And I feel like that is just so encapsulating of the Queens up in the Twin Cities.
Couldn't have said it better myself. I definitely think that's a really solid name for this team, especially with the state of hockey being Minnesota. Yeah, Minnesota Rain. I'm so here for it. I chose a different angle of it. I chose the Minnesota Pioneers. Minnesota is a state where there was a lot of Native American heritage and culture and a lot of creation. I mean, these are people who've been around, know their strength, know their power. The Purple Pioneers, too. I mean, you got the P and the P for the coloring, all that good stuff. I stuck with Minnesota Pioneers. We've got the Pioneers and the Rain. Vote down in the comments who you guys think which is the better name for all of these teams we've come up with. And maybe we'll start referring to them as our chosen names for the foreseeable future. You'll never know. Let's move on to the Toronto really quick. So, one thing I know about Toronto, not Canadian by any stretch of the imagination. All I know, it's cold and it's snowy. I picked the Toronto Blizzards for this. You've also got hockey. It's a cold sport. There's ice, snow. It's a cold town in Toronto. I chose the Toronto Blizzards for all that cold environment up there and the feisty nature of the team, too.
I absolutely love it. As it's well known, my favorite NHL team is the Colorado Avalanche as a native, and I love a good force of nature, natural destruction name. I think that that's absolutely a phenomenal name for them. I went a little bit of a different route. Toronto is home to the Hockey Hall of Fame. It's one, when you think of hockey, you think of Toronto. It's a place that just inspired the love of the sport. And so I chose the name the Toronto Legends to really lean into that legendary historical aspect of really trying to trust and put the whole faith in some of these more historic players and playing tribute to the roots to especially a lot of these women.
I respect it. Good names all around. Let's move on to our next team, Boston.
For Boston, I gotta be honest, they did officially try out trademarks for all of these teams, which you can go look up on your own. They called them the Boston Wicked, which was one that they had.
Dude, I think
The
it's
initial one.
sick.
I'm not gonna say. I think, in my opinion, they should call them the Boston Wicked. I didn't choose that one because I didn't want to cop out. For mine, we're looking at it now. We went a very similar route. I picked the Boston Brawlers. I love me a little bit of alliteration. I love just when you think of Boston, you think tough, hard-nosed city, someone where if they get your Dunkin' order wrong, they're gonna punch you right in the nose. And this Boston team absolutely encapsulates that. This team is hard-nosed. They're really feeling it. They are just an absolutely brutal squad. Brutal if you're the other team. If you're a team, they are going to support you till the day you die.
Well, I kind of did something similar, but a little less fighty. I did the Boston Enforcers. I think it's a cool name, kind of a similar line as Dylan. Boston Enforcers. There's a lot of enforcing the culture, the aggression, shall we say, of Boston people. So I chose Boston Enforcers for my name. Pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory. Let's move on to New York. For my team, I chose the New York Mavericks. I thought I just like Maverick. I think it's a cool name. Other than that, literally no relation. I just think it's cool.
I
It's
mean,
cool.
I'll even back you up on that. I think Mavericks is just such like a great term for people who come from New York. They don't stand on what everyone else is doing, especially in the city. They work at their own pace. They aren't going to just do something because someone says they are. They're going to run on their own. They're gonna just live their best life and they're going to be their own Mavericks. For mine, I gotta admit, this might be my favorite one. I went with the New York Apple. And I mean, it's kind of easy. It's the Big Apple. Whenever you get an assist in hockey, it's called an apple. And so it's a very simple way to bleed into the culture and combine the hockey aspect of it. And it also, hey, it's an assist. You don't get all the glory for scoring. You got to go ahead and support your teammates. It supports camaraderie. And I would absolutely buy a jersey with a giant apple on the front of it. Just keep Steve Jobs out of this one.
You know, I'll say it's my least favorite. Actually, your Ottawa one might be my least favorite, but I'll have to hear your explanation on that one. But
People
I can see the hockey heritage. I can see it. Again, we'll have you guys vote on our socials, but it is still, I can see it. But imagine the mascot. Imagine, imagine an apple. That's not fierce. That's not fighty. That's not the New York culture. Yeah, it's the big apple, but like,
Have you considered an apple with boxing gloves? That's pretty
okay,
fierce, wouldn't
so
you
that's a
say?
little better. That's a little better.
The New
But
York fighting
still, it's an
apple.
apple. It's an
Yeah.
apple. Throw a worm in there and you're screwed. Let's move
New
on to
York.
Ottawa, shall we?
So
All
for
right.
mine, this is Emma's not a fan, but I personally decided I would dig into the culture a little bit. Ottawa, uh, it's obviously known for being the New York for excuse me for being the capital of Canada. That's one of its main things it's known for, which is awesome to play into that. That's what the Senators do. That's what a lot of them. I believe the Ontario 67s are also named after that aspect of when it was founded. But for me, I decided to go a different route. There's a huge amount of support for sports and a lot of great ice fishing in Ottawa. You've got the Ottawa River there, and so I am going to go with the fishing route, and we've got the Ottawa Bluegills. It is a unique name, might not quite fit the color scheme yet, but you can switch stuff around. And I mean, I would love to see a fierce looking fish on a jersey.
Okay, so we're gonna have a mascot. That's the bluegills, but our colors are red. But I feel like you could have chosen a cooler fish, like a freaking pike or something. The Ottawa pike. Not really that cool still, but it's a fish.
I like the bluegills rolls off the tongue. Like I would
It
100%
does.
support the
That's the
bluegills.
only good thing about it.
Also, I think that Ottawa should change. They should exchange colors with New York. So New York should be the red apples, and then we get the blue
Mm,
Ottawa bluegills. So that's part of this
okay,
arrangement.
okay. I can see where you're getting at right now.
All right,
All right,
what
well, for
what is so
me,
much better on your end, Emma?
the Ottawa Capitals. Come on. Is it basic? Yes. Will it be iconic? Yes. All right. I said what I said. It's the capital of Canada. You've got the Senators, you've got the 67s, you've got all of this Ottawa capital energy, and that's why there's the rivalry between Ottawa and Montreal. All right. It's awesome. It's cool. Boom.
I will
Ottawa
give it to you.
Capitals.
You don't have to change the color scheme for your name to work. So we
Yep.
will move on to our final team, the rival of Ottawa. What you got for Montreal, Emma?
So you dug into heritage for Ottawa. I dug into heritage for Montreal. My team name was the Montreal Traders. All right. There's a huge fur trading culture there when Montreal was first getting founded in Quebec. I think it could be pretty cool. You could have like a Paul Bunyan type guy for your mascot. I think it's a good option.
And so I think that would be absolutely killer on that end. Although trade means something absolutely different. Are they going to be like trading away all their players every year? Like what are you
That
implying, Emma?
that could I did think about that aspect, but maybe it's the fact that they don't trade away the players.
They're the traders that don't trade, the traders that have
Yes.
moved past. Like I said, I looked into a little bit of the Montreal history as well. Saw the fur traders, saw you took that route. But another thing that Montreal absolutely loves, I'm going with the Montreal Jazz. It supports that music heritage, their love for just some good old fashioned horn music. Just it's a little freestyle. This team doesn't really play into a specific style. They're always moving. There's a lot of motion, and it's the same with jazz. Even though it's not the traditional way, it's not the way that everybody else does it. They've got their own style, and guess what? It works.
You know what? I'll give you that. It's pretty cool. You know,
Or another cat.
can't say I wasn't the most creative with my names, but where you guys can get creative with your names is on our social medias. So, what are our social media handles, Dylan's?
Yes. So we are on Instagram. We are on Twitter. We are on TikTok, all on the same one. It will likely be in the description below. We'll probably put up an end screen. We will also promote it everywhere. It is keep, KEEP _ score, SCORE _ pod, POD. You can also reach us at keeping.score@gmail.com. That will also be down below. What are your personal socials, Emma?
Well, I have Twitter, and it should be at Emma_Askren, ASKREN. Look up Emma Askren on Twitter. You'll probably find me. Pretty active on there. What about you, Dylan?
You are more than welcome to Instagram stalk me. My Instagram is on public. I post a lot of stuff on there. I also post on Twitter. Same username for both. It is my first name, Dylan, middle initial R, and then last name Heinrich. I will probably be promoting it elsewhere. I'll also be promoting this podcast. So if you see this podcast, you'll also find me.
All right. Well, this has been the Keeping Score podcast with Emma Askren and Dylan Heinrich. It has been awesome. Let us know, give us feedback, write us an email, leave us a comment, all that good stuff. And we will see you guys on Sunday.